What's good, folks? Welcome to Breaking the Set. I'm Manuel Rapalo, filling in for Abby Martin. Hey, remember that viral video that came out of the height of the Occupy movement? You know, the one showing a cop at UC Davis pepper spraying a line of students?
Happening here? I want you to have the pepper spray in your face. I want you to have it in your face right now. I want you to have pepper spray.
Pretty brutal, right? Well, good news. Justice has finally been served. That's right, John Pike, the policeman in the video who was merely watering his hippies, has been awarded a much-deserved $38,000 in workers' compensation from UC Davis. You see, back in June, Pike filed a claim with the university saying that he suffered from, quote, unspecified psychiatric and nervous system damage. Hey, I can totally relate. See, releasing an entire can of mace on a group of lazy students can really give you a case of pretty bad PTSD. In fact, maybe we should start giving all the cops who participated in Occupy's brutal crackdown on protesters comp money. Watching old ladies cry and dirty hippies bleed from their head as a result of your actions can really take a toll on one's mental health. So make sure to give it, shed a tear for John Pike today. And let's go break the set. Earlier this year, Breaking the Set was joined by peace activist Cindy Sheehan. She, along with a group of dedicated writers, took a trip across the country called the Tour de Peace. Inspired what she learned on that journey and the support from a growing number of citizens disillusioned by the two-party system, Cindy has decided to run for governor of California on the Peace and Freedom Party ticket. She joined me earlier today to discuss her campaign and the biggest problems facing California. I asked her why she would choose to run for political office knowing the long odds for third-party candidates.
Well, because I'm with the Peace and Freedom Party. It's not one of the dominant corporate parties or war parties or the party of the bankers. It's not one of the parties of the establishment. And yes, running for office is a real establishment thing to do. But what my campaign is doing is we're actually talking about revolution. We're talking about not reforming the system, but overthrowing it and renewing it, and doing this by a community basis. Jerry Brown is running on, as a matter of fact, he's raised millions and millions of dollars for his campaign in 2014 when he hasn't even announced if he's running again. But he's running on this, his slogan of California is back. California is back for the corporations, for the oil companies, for the prison industrial complex, for privatized education, for the 1%, for the establishment. I am the candidate of the people. I'm the candidate of the revolution, because the revolution is looking to overthrow that system and put in place one that is healthier for us.
I wanted to ask you specifically about one issue, and that's the issue of police violence, especially in Southern California, where it's really turning into an epidemic. This week was National Day Against Police Brutality, and there was a 13-year-old that was executed by police for carrying a fake gun. This is a really important issue. As governor, what would you do to address this?
Well, the first thing that we would do is that we would have to overturn that police officers' Bill of Rights they have that protects them from accountability, that we would put in place in every community that has a police force. We would put in place citizen oversight, not police oversight of the actions of the police officers. And my heart goes out to that family in Santa Rosa where that happened, and my campaign will be there on Tuesday in solidarity with them and in protesting that terrible incident of brutality. But it's like you said, it's happening all over the state, and there has to be accountability. That's what the families are calling for, and Manny, that's what I've been calling for since my son was killed. Accountability to these people who murder people all over the world and in our state, whether it's the large militaries or the empire or these police forces. There has to be accountability.
Yeah, and Cindy, you unfortunately are one of the few people that are speaking out against this sort of thing, and California ends up being one of the, like a sort of microcosm for the bigger issues plaguing the country. Another issue is with overcrowded prisons and the prison industrial complex. In California, you know, there was a recent hunger strike that just ended. The UN is now looking into California prison system. What do you think is the root of this problem, and what needs to be changed?
Well, I think the root of the problem is prisons for profit now and the prison industrial complex. Jerry Brown gets millions of dollars from the prison guard union and the private prisons like Corrections Corporations of America. And Brown was ordered by the federal government to release thousands of prisoners. And instead of doing that, he's taking the surplus that the state has of $1 billion, and he's giving it to these privatized prisons to open up beds or open up room for the people instead of releasing nonviolent offenders and people who are at low to no risk of recidivism.
How is it that corporations can have a louder voice than people? In California, support for labeling went from 61% to less than 50% because of those incessant ads that reached the people before the election. How can people's initiatives win against the corporatocracy?
Well, the initiative process was actually California led the way in the early part of the 20th century in this initiative, these progressive reforms to government, but the money has overtaken them. Look at Prop 8, the proposition against gay marriage. We had millions of dollars flowing from outside the state to defeat gay marriage here in California. What we need to do, and we're talking about this revolution, is give the people back control of the state. We need, and one of the reasons I constantly run for office, this is my third time, is to put these ideas, these alternatives into the dialogue, to say that money shouldn't buy candidates, money shouldn't buy propositions, that we should, that propaganda shouldn't be, that if there's going to be propaganda, that both sides of the issue should have a fair chance to, promote their case and their facts to the public, not just the side that has the most money. And of course, the GMO labeling, they raised $50 million to defeat that, where the pro-GMO people raised $8 million. And Manny, my thing is we have to go to the internet and research what companies supported Prop 37 and what companies, didn't support Prop 37, in fact, defeated it. And we have to support those companies that gave money to Prop 37 by buying their products that are already labeled, that they agreed to label them with no GMOs, and then we need to boycott the people who defeated Prop 37.
Indeed, we need to use our purchasing power to kind of drive these corporations into irrelevancy. Cindy, I wanted to ask you just one last question. We're running out of time. You support something called the Grange Movement, and I wanted to know exactly what that is and how you would implement this statewide. We have about a minute left.
Well, that's something California leads the world, is one of the world leaders in agriculture. We need to change from these big agribusinesses back to organic farming, and we need farm collectives and cooperatives. And the Grange Movement is a movement that these people farmers, organic small farmers can get together, that increases their purchasing power. It increases, the benefits when you have more people. You can get benefits, but it also builds this community that we're talking about for our revolution. And so Grange movements, we need community centers. We need, community councils that work with Sacramento, like Hugo Chavez did in Venezuela when he did his revolution. And we can work together to build California into a state, into a model, into a roadmap that hopefully the other 49 states can follow, and people around the world can look at California as this model of a people's revolution and a place to live where everybody has access to healthcare, education, a clean environment, healthy food, and shelter.
Indeed, Cindy, it's a revolution of values that is what this country, is what California needs. Thank you so much for taking the time. That was Cindy Sheehan, anti-war activist and candidate for California governor. Thank you so much. Does Pakistan have a double standard when it comes to drones? It's a question worth asking after Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif sat down with President Obama yesterday in the White House. According to The Guardian, Sharif asked Obama to stop the drone strikes that have become a chronic problem in his country. However, some White House officials are rolling their eyes, especially after leaked CIA memos allege that Pakistan's government has been in the know on the strikes in their own country. Now, despite hypocrisy surrounding Sharif's White House visit, we should remember that Pakistan is only one of several countries where the U.S. is conducting drone strikes. In fact, U.S. drone use has been ramped up immensely over the past few years in places like Yemen, Algeria, Libya, and Somalia. And just like Pakistan, the strikes in Yemen are only fueling civilian hatred toward the U.S. In fact, former State Department official Nabil Khouri recently explained in an article that the drone accuracy rate is embarrassing, saying that, quote, given Yemen's tribal structure, the U.S. generates roughly 40 to 60 new enemies for every al-Qaeda operative killed by drones. Excuse me, 40 to 60 new enemies? It's like battling the Hydra, cutting off its head only to have 40 more appear in its place. To say that drone strikes are counterproductive to U.S. interests is a severe understatement. And it makes sense. Last year, 491 civilians were killed by drone strikes in Yemen alone.
عندما وصلت هناك بدون السيارة هذه مقلوبة ودي تحرق البناء. يعني وعندما وصلت عند السيارة وصلت قد أبي وأمي قد حربوا.
هنا يعني بقايا جثث ما عادش خرجوا من السيارة وهنا يعني جزء من جثث تحترق.
Okay, let's face it, drones are a reality. They are the front line of the war on terror. But how did it come to this? Well, in the 1980s, Israeli-born Abraham Karim designed the Albatross, an unmanned aircraft able to fly for 56 hours straight. And as soon as the U.S. military learned about this early-stage drone, they put DARPA funding behind it. Eventually, drones were used for surveillance, aiding soldiers on the ground in Bosnia in the 90s. Then in 2001, the CIA decided to mount weapons on the now infamous Predator drone. And in a rushed response to 9/11, the CIA put together a program that would allow the agency to kill al-Qaeda operatives almost anywhere in the world. This was the birth of targeted assassination by way of drones. And while George W. Bush did use drones, the program was still fairly secretive. It wasn't until President Obama that drones really took off. In fact, Dennis C. Blair, a former White House official, explained the shift from capture to kill when he said, quote, the steady refrain in the White House was, this is the only game in town. All right, by 2010, we learned about the weekly counterterrorism meetings held every Terror Tuesday, where Obama would personally approve the names of an ever-growing kill list. Since then, drone strikes have led to thousands more deaths all over the world, and it's prompted a new type of war, where drone operators in a CIA trailer in Nevada are completely disconnected from the actual devastation caused by these strikes. And as if the thought of a killer drone isn't scary enough, a recent article by Joshua Faust alludes to the fact that drones could soon make calculated attack decisions, get this, on their own. Yup, it's the dawn of an automated killer robot, guys. Except these ones can fly. This news arrives on the heels of condemnation by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, who deem some drone strikes as war crimes, not to mention the questions over privacy and civil liberties by using them here domestically. Now, knowing that the U.S. flies these things around the world has prompted other countries to create their own drones. It really is like another arms race. The fact of the matter is that the longer the U.S. continues to pretend that drone strikes are the most effective way to fight terrorism, more terrorists will be created. If we want to continue to spread democracy and let this be our foreign policy, then we better be prepared to live with the consequences. All right, guys. After the break, we'll talk about the latest on Libya with Hafid Al-Gwel. Stay tuned. This week marks the anniversary of the fall of Libyan dictator Muammar Gadhafi. But you won't see much celebration on the streets of Tripoli. You see, since the Arab Spring, Libya has been plagued by instability and political violence. In fact, earlier this month, Libyan Prime Minister Ali Zaidan was abducted from a hotel in Tripoli and held for several hours by armed gunmen. Although he was rescued shortly after, the incident reveals the fragile state of Libya following the NATO-backed intervention in 2011. And just today, politicians in oil-rich eastern Libya declared autonomy from the central government. As militias gain more and more power in the government, authority is repeatedly undermined. Experts now worry that the infighting within the country is leading to another civil war. So to help me break down the roots of the violence, as well as what's next for Libya, I'm joined now by columnist and Middle East Affairs analyst Hafid Al-Gwel. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Manny.
So earlier this week, the anniversary of the fall of Gadhafi, the end of a 42-year dictatorship, yet we saw no celebration out in the streets. Why is that?
Well, I think you answered the question by asking it. People are extremely disappointed. Security is non-existent. People are at a loss. Legitimacy of the GNC and the government has been shaken beyond, I think, repair. So people are completely lost as to what is going on in the country, where is it heading. Today's announcement by the people in the east side of Libya, and it's a small group, let's be very frank, they don't have really the wide support, and they are shooting themselves in the foot, I think, by the way they are trying to preempt any constitutional or national dialogue to achieve their aims, which is a federal system, which is a legitimate claim, but you can't just jump on it by declaring a government or hijacking oil fields and ports.
Yeah, and it seems like it's a very complicated situation when you throw all that into the mix. But another aspect of it that I found very interesting is that NATO, with the help, with France and the United States, has had such a heavy hand in the intervention. Yet we have no coverage by the American media on this. What do you think this is? How can they just turn a blind eye to an anniversary like this?
Unfortunately, this is Einstein's line that if you repeat the same mistake expecting different results, that's the definition of stupidity. And NATO and Western allies have repeated this mistake consistently in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Somalia, and so on. They jump on the military bandwagon. They destroy a regime that they don't like, which is fine. I understand that in Libya it was a UN resolution, but then they never follow up with what needs to happen afterwards, which is the post-conflict phase. And they just turn a blind eye, go away for a few years until something happens to shake the security of the United States or the West itself on its own
Right,
land.
and I do want to ask you
and then they go back.
That announcement. But okay, so let's talk about another story that just came out today that we just said. Eastern Libya declared autonomy from the central government. How much of that decision is based on oil, and how much of a what does that play into the conflict? The fact that Eastern Libya is oil rich and that they're now announcing autonomy from the government.
Well, on the oil front, the map of oil in Libya is, yes, there's big chunks, and traditionally the historical oil fields are in the eastern side. But there is also oil in the west and in the south. 2 days ago, there was a major discovery of oil in the south of Libya. So it is spread, but in the east, it is entirely about oil. I mean, you are talking about a bunch of gangsters and militias and all kinds of self-motivated groups.
And that's what adds to this, to the complexity of this, is that we hear that we have all these growing militias, and not all of the country is oil rich, and it's really hard to understand who these militias are comprised of as well. You said a lot of them are very self-serving, but this isn't all about oil. So what do the different sides in this have to gain?
Well, they think by declaring themselves as an independent, separate government, they will achieve two things. One is they get control of the oil that is in that region. And two, they preempt the process of constitutional making. The idea is Libya is going through a process of coming up with a new constitution, which will define the kind of government the Libya as a whole would like to have. whether it's federal, whether it is centralized government, whether it's decentralized. These guys are jumping the gun because they are afraid that if this is put to a referendum, even within the East itself, not too many people are going to go for the federal option. You have to understand the federal option started in 1951, but then it got changed in 1963. So claiming that they want to go back to the old constitution is actually not a correct assumption, because the constitution was changed.
And that itself is adding to the rifts in politics.
But these groups, man, you have to understand, these groups are, it's a combination of all kinds. You've got criminals, you've got politically motivated groups, you've got tribal groups, you've got groups that have ideological and jihadist background to them. So it's a complete mix. I mean, as for example, the respected and prestigious Oxford Analytica at one point said, it's becoming a country of militias, of gangsters. It's not even a failed state. We are heading to a state that is full of gangsters.
And it looks
the Prime Minister's story last week is
exactly, that's a perfect example.
Absolutely.
The Prime Minister kidnapped, it just shows the rift. But I want to point to another story, which is the story of Gadhafi's son, who has, along with several others, been indicted under charges of treason, murder, and several other charges. And I'm wondering what this news might do to the political rifts, and whether or not this is going to add and exacerbate the violence that we're seeing right now.
Absolutely. I mean, you have Iraq here revisited. The authorities in Libya have repeated the same mistakes of Iraq. They did not recognize that it was a civil war, and therefore you have parties that were aligned to Gadhafi, and you need to engage them. They went further and isolated anybody who ever worked in the government from 1969 to 2011.
So what can the government do to regain that legitimacy?
I don't think the government can do anything at this stage. I mean, let's be honest. Right now, Libya on its own will not be able to actually come out of this. I think the international community, which still has Libya under Chapter 7, needs to take its responsibility and needs to engage in this country in a serious way.
So let's talk about the international community for a second, because if the United States has responsibility, the United States doesn't have a very good track record when it comes to post-occupation anything. And to that end, I want to ask you about Abu Anas al-Libi, who is the alleged terrorist behind the 1998 bombings in Tanzania and Kenya. Now, the United States kidnapped him in Tripoli without the permission of the Libyan government. So is the U.S., is this the kind of message that the U.S. is sending, that they themselves, are they not undermining the legitimacy of the government by doing this as well?
Well, there are two things here. One is we can't call what happened in Libya an occupation, a U.S. occupation. It was a UN unanimous vote. So it is the responsibility of the international community as a whole, not of the United States alone. Secondly, the issue of Abu Anas al-Libi, there is a lot of debate, and there are some unnamed sources, as the New York Times revealed last week, that the Libyan government was cooperating with the U.S. in seizing him. They just could not publicly say they do because they were afraid of the backlash, which shows you again how weak the Libyan government is. It cannot come out and take responsibility for this act. Now, Abu Anas al-Libi is actually a much luckier guy, because he ends up in New York in front of a court. He has human rights protection, he has due process. Now, think about the 8,000...
That's arguable. I would say, but extraordinary rendition doesn't normally equate.
Well, it's not really exactly a rendition here. I mean, he was indicted and he's going through the legal process, which is whichever. But believe me, this is much better than the 8,000 Libyans who are languishing in illegal jails run by militias all over the country that the United Nations itself has pointed to.
So if you say that that this is a fault, or much of the blame falls on the international community, given that whenever we have international involvement anywhere, we can see the failure that they've had in Syria after so many years of civil war there, what do they need to do in Libya? What could they possibly do to make things better?
I think they already have the framework. The legal framework is in place. Libya is still under Chapter 7. I think the implications of a complete collapse in Libya are global in nature. Libya Imagine this. Libya is not Somalia or Afghanistan. This is a country with 2,000 miles on the Mediterranean. This is a country with enormous, at the fifth...
We're almost running out of time.
Yeah, the fifth level of reserves in the world of oil and gas. You have militias running everywhere. It is the country that triggered instability in the Sahel countries. You have Egypt that is suffering from arms smuggling from Libya and gangsters. Tunisia is going through the same thing.
It's
so
something
it is an international
affects the
problem.
entire region. And thank you for joining us, Hafid Al-Gwel, columnist and Middle East analyst. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. I take.
All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, guys. But please join us again tomorrow. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter. And you can follow me at Manuel_Rapalo. Have a great night, folks.